Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Health One Technologies free online learning session. Today we're going to be talking about how to understand MACRA, and in addition, at the end of this, we're going to review some information that will help you plan MACRA for your organization. My name is Jennifer Monahan. Many of you may already know me. If you don't, I am a partner with Health One Technologies. We're a consulting firm that specializes in the implementation and optimization of electronic health records. In particular, we work a lot with the GE Centricity product, Allscripts, NextGen, a few other products as well out there. We also do a great deal of focus around various quality programs, including meaningful use and MACRA that we are focusing on today. Just a few housekeeping things. I do have everybody's microphones turned off. If you have a question, there is a question and answer session within the webinar program that you should be able to put in. Feel free to ask questions, and at the end of the session, I will answer as many of those as I can. In addition, there is a section that has handouts available to you, and I've put a few things out there for you to look at today. One of the things that I have put out there is our MACRA Planning workbook. At the end of today's session, we're going to look at that, and I'm going to show you how to kind of work through it and fill out some of the information that might help you in your MACRA planning. In addition, there are a couple of other things that you might find of value during your MACRA implementation. One is a list of the advanced APMs in the event that you are part of an ACO or not sure if you're part of an ACO and what type of ACO it is. There's a listing of those programs for you. And also the MIPS qualified registries, and that's something that we'll talk about during the course of this program. But those things are all available in the handout section of your webinar program. If you have issues locating them, just let us know at the end of the session and we can get them over to you via email. So today, what we're going to talk about, we have a few objectives in the presentation. I am going to try to limit the presentation itself with some specific content that I think you will find most useful. There is a lot of information about MACRA and it can be a little overwhelming. So I want to keep these sessions to 30 minutes. They will be broken into a series of 4. There may actually be some additional ones put in at the end, in particular around ACOs and how to report your measures. But for today, we're just going to do an overview of MACRA, and then we'll talk about some of the details of how to plan for it. So we're going to talk about what MACRA is, the reporting periods and options that are available, important dates that you need to know, and then the various tracks of the program that you need to become familiar with. Then we're going to do a specific, this session is focused around MIPS. So we are going to talk about the MIPS program itself. Like I said, in future sessions, I may talk about the APMs, the advanced payment models, or the MIPS APMs, which is a third option that we may talk about as well. But under MIPS, we're going to talk about who's eligible, what the financial impacts are, how to report, and then we're going to talk about the program itself, the components, and where to start with the program. So what is MACRA? A lot of you may be familiar with this, but if you're not, I think it's always a good idea to kind of start with why we're doing this. So in our current, well, actually previous payment system, before 2017, we got paid through Medicare in what was called a fee-for-service. So that means basically no matter what you billed, you got paid for. So there was no accountability to the quality of the service that you were performing. It was just based on the quantity of service. And then every year, all the way back to like 1996 or 97, there was a thing called the sustainable growth rate that Congress had put into place that was supposed to control the cost of Medicare with a payment adjustment. And then every year there was concern that, Medicare was going to be cut by 20% or 15%, and that happened every year. So in 2015, President Obama put into place a new legislation, which is the MACRA program has come out of, which is to eliminate the sustainable growth rate. And in order to do that, we're going to put together a quality payment system. So this focuses on quality of care and not just the quantity. It also combines your previous reporting programs for PQRS and meaningful use as well. The performance period for this year is what they're calling a transition year. So in 2017, we have some flexibility in how we're going to report under this program. There are basically 3 options that you have available. The first one is something that's called testing, which is basically you submit one quality measure to CMS. And when you do that, you're basically going to avoid any penalties, but you're not going to be eligible for incentive dollars. The second option is any 90-day reporting period. So this can be, throughout the course of the year at any period that you feel like you can capture that 90-day reporting period. This one will avoid penalties, and you can also potentially get some incentive dollars. And then the last one is a full participation year. So if you haven't actually started participating yet, you may not be able to do this. There might be some flexibility for you depending on what measures you select and what types of programs you want to participate in. But this one is something that it would have been better to have started earlier. However, we may be able to go back and accommodate that. Also, if you're using the CMS web interface, if you're going to do a MIPS survey, or you're submitting via claims, those are all a full year reporting period. So again, if those are things that you haven't started yet, you're more than likely going to be in the 90-day period or the testing phase, depending on what your goals are. This is just a different look of what I just discussed. So again, the test pace is basically you're going to be neutral. You're not going to receive a penalty, but you're also not going to get incentive dollars. The partial year or the 90-day minimum, you're going to be eligible for some of that incentive dollars. And then the full year, chances are you'll be able to achieve more of the incentive dollars based on your performance period. Some key dates. The program began on January 1st of 2017. The last day to begin a 90-day reporting, and this date's important because after that date of October 2nd, you won't be able to do the second option there for the 90-day reporting. So that means that there will be no incentive dollars available to you. Basically, you will just be getting the neutral payment adjustment. So you won't get a penalty, but you also won't get the incentive dollars. So October 2nd is sort of like the cutoff date that you can start participating in the program. The performance data must be submitted before March 31st. So this is very similar to the previous PQRS submissions. In the past, we had to submit that quality data before the end of March. It's very, very similar process. And then the payment adjustments happen as of January 1st of 2019. So this is the performance period. Then in 2018, CMS does all the evaluations and calculations. And then beginning January 1st of 2019, you see those adjustments in your Medicare reimbursements. So there's 3 different tracks of the MACRA program. One's called an advanced alternative payment model. There are very, very few people in the country that are in this option. I won't really discuss it a whole lot today because it really is just something that's not common in the market. The second one is, it's an alternative payment model, but it's not advanced, so they call this a MIPS APM. If you are part of an ACO currently, this might be something that you are falling into. So we will have some future discussion in particular about this model. I know we do have some clients that fall into this category where they're part of an ACO Each ACO has its own sort of variations of how you're participating with MIPS. So this is its own discussion in and of itself. So today we're not going to cover the details of that, but it is something that you may have as an option to you if you are participating in an ACO. And then the third option is the merit-based incentive payment system, otherwise known as MIPS, which is what we're going to discuss in detail today. So the first thing is who can participate. This is important for 2017. There are fewer providers that there will be in 2019. There's going to be a transition period. So in 2017 and 2018, this is the list of people that will be eligible to participate under MIPS. Physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, nurse specialists, and CRNAs. In the future, physical therapists, other ancillary sort of services will also be eligible and accountable for participating under MIPS. If you are an organization that has both providers and physical therapists, and the physical therapists are interested in at least starting the program so that in 2019, they're not having to start all from scratch, you can start doing that in 2017 and 18 on a voluntary basis until 2019 when they're ready to report. There are some exclusions. So the eligible physicians that I listed, if you are in that category, you basically are held accountable for MIPS. So any Medicare Part B reimbursements that you get are going to be subject to penalty and or incentive unless you meet one of these exclusions. So there's three types of exclusions. One is a low volume threshold, and this is based on a couple of different ways. So first, CMS is going to go back and look at historical claims from the September 1st of 2015 to August 31st of 2016. If you have are below $30,000 in that time period, or between September 1st of 2016 and August 31st of 2017, you will meet the low volume threshold exclusion and will not be counted in the MIPS program. So CMS is going to run these numbers behind the scenes, and they are supposed to notify people if you meet that low volume threshold. The other category that's in there, and this again is calculated on a very similar mechanism, is if your Medicare beneficiary is less than 100. So even if you bill over $30,000, if your total Medicare beneficiary count is less than 100, you are excluded from MIPS. And this is meant to be for those specialties that might have a high value test or procedure that they bill that puts them over the $30,000 mark, but they have fewer than 100 patients. So that's why there's both the low volume threshold and the beneficiary allowance in there. And then the third option is if you are a newly enrolled Medicare clinician. And this looks at the clinician's NPI number and a TIN to kind of say, okay, this person hasn't seen any patients in this year for under Medicare, so they're newly enrolled. In addition to the exclusions, there's also some exceptions. These exceptions we'll discuss in more detail as we go through the other webinar sessions specific to measures, because most of these exceptions fall under various measure criteria that we have to meet. But CMS did kind of recognize that there's some specialties that are going to have it's going to be more difficult for them to kind of get through some of the measures that are listed out there. And it means they're not excluded. They still are MIPS providers, but they can kind of have some exceptions to the rules. And these in particular are non-patient facing clinicians, so pathologists, radiologists, anesthesiologists, people that don't necessarily see the patient in an office setting. They might actually just work in a lab, or they're reading results, things like that. Small practices that have less than 15 eligible clinicians, there are special rules for this particular group as well, and then for those doctors located in rural areas. So as we go through the remainder of the webinar series, you may see, for instance, under certain components that instead of doing 4 measures, they only have to do 2. So those are the exceptions that are set up in the system. So let's just talk a little bit about the money that's at risk. I know I've talked about penalties and incentives and, a lot of just kind of numbers that we discussed in the market in general. And, this program, it's very similar to even PQRS was way back when it started. It's a program set up to be like there's a penalty if you're not doing it, but there's also a whole bank of incentive dollars, which people could really take advantage of, especially if you're an organization that has already done PQRS and you're already doing meaningful use. You have all the pieces together. You just have to know how to strategize and get the most out of it, out of each measure in each section of the program, so that your score will be high enough to tap into those incentive dollars. So the program itself is set up to be budget neutral. So that means that the penalties, the base penalty for 2019, which is actually the 2017 performance period, is 4%. So that means that if you do absolutely nothing, you're going to get a 4% penalty. If you are somebody that submitted just even in the testing phase where you just submit one quality measure, you're going to avoid that penalty. So when they talk about this being budget neutral, the overall incentive dollars that might be available and even the penalty attached to it are going to fluctuate based on the amount of people that get the penalty versus the amount of people that do something to avoid the penalty. So there is some weighting that could happen here, one way or the other. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then in addition to the base adjustment, which could go all the way up to 4%, again, depending on how people are participating, there's also $500 million in exceptional performance monies. And this is where I think people can really take advantage of the programs that they've already been doing, bring it together, strategize, get the highest score that you can get, and then really get access to this money that's available. So it's just a sample financial calculator that we put together for groups. So we take your total Medicare Part B payments. We usually just use the year before, or we can do some sort of average over 6 months or 3 months or something like that. But this is just a sample. So this particular practice had $1.5 million in Medicare Part B payments. And you can see in 2017, that exceptional performance money that I talked about, I put in a 10% number. It can be up to 10% actually. And then there's a base incentive or penalty, which is 4%. So this particular group could, if they were to score at the very top of their curve, they could get $150,000 just in incentive dollars. In addition, they would get $60,000 in base incentives. So their total incentive dollars could be actually up to $210,000. And if they do nothing and they get that penalty, they're going to have $60,000 at stake. And you can see that number just continues to go up over the course of the years, all the way up until the year of 2020 or 2022 will be the actual payment year, where we get to a 9% incentive and penalty. There are a couple of different options for reporting, individual and group reporting. They're both options that are available. Very similar, again, to PQRS. You could report as individuals or groups depending on your status. This is something that's important to know, how clinicians are going to be identified. So they're identified based on a combination of the TIN and the NPI. And there's one important factor here in that if a provider practices in more than one organization, they could potentially have to submit MACRA or MIPS numbers under multiple organizations. So that's important to know. So each MIPS eligible clinician is basically a number that is a TIN and NPI. So if that provider has 3 TINs that they work under, they're going to have to report 3 different times, and their adjustments will be different based on the TIN that they're located at. So if they perform better at one TIN versus another, they could see a different adjustment in that organization. In individual reporting, each provider is going to pick their own measures. They're going to be accountable for reporting basically for what they do. Each provider could select a different measure based on what their specialty is, based on, what they are most comfortable doing. So that is, kind of the difference. Again, the overall process behind it, each provider you're going to have to monitor each provider, make sure that they're doing what they need to do throughout the process. So it is potentially a little more overhead. I think that you're going to want to look at each provider anyways, but this is something that gives each individual more flexibility within their score, so to speak. The group reporting is defined as you have to have at least 2 providers that are part of a tax ID. So that's it. In order to do group reporting, you have to have at least 2 people. The difference between group and individual is in the group, the numbers are going to be aggregated across the board. So if you have 10 providers, those 10 providers' data is going to be put together basically and calculated across an average. And that's what the entire group is going to get. This becomes a little trickier around selecting measures. The one thing that is kind of interesting, and you'll see this in future webinars as I talk about quality a little bit, CMS will pick your 6 highest performing measures. So there's some discussions around, what the strategy should be for picking quality measures in a group setting. Is it something that you do based on specialty, or do you pick measures that go kind of globally across the board? So when you do group reporting, there is a little more strategy involved as to how the group as a whole will be able to perform at its highest level. The group must meet the definition of a group through the whole payment period. So that means if you decide that you're going to report at a group at the end of the year, and for some reason you're a small group, or you have less than that 2 doctors, you have to be that group process throughout the whole year. So that's an important thing to know. And then you don't have to do any special registration. In the past for PQRS, we had to require, you had to do a G-Pro sign up basically to say I'm going to report as a group. And that required that registration process to happen before, usually it was June 30th. So in this case, you don't have to do that unless you're going to use the web interface to report. If you're going to use the web interface to report, then it does have to happen before June 30th. Couple key points. The full reporting is going to give you the best a full year, or even, we still have lots of time. You can do 90 days, you can do 120 days. There's lots of flexibility that you have there. We're kind of already into the year, so the full reporting may not be an option for everybody, but there's no reason why you can't start today and follow through for the rest of the year. 90 days will still give you a fair amount of data. And still after, you'll have the potential to earn some of those incentive dollars, but it will be a little more difficult because your window to improve your scores are going to be a lot smaller. There is simple, easy ways. If you want to just avoid the penalty and not go after any of the incentive dollars, it's really, really simple. Actually, I mean, it's just one measure has to be submitted. They really did make it easy. And then the positive adjustments, again, is based on how well you perform. So if in a 90-day period, you're really, really focusing on the measures that you're going to select and you perform very highly in those measures, you could still get a lot of incentive dollars. It's not based on the time, it's the performance that you have. So the categories that are available for MIPS, quality, which is PQRS, that's the old PQRS program, advancing care information, which is meaningful use, and then the last one are the improvement activities, which is a brand new category to us. Just a quick review, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, but it's just to kind of reiterate what we're going to be doing in MIPS. Quality is 60% of your score, which is that's a big focus. So we really want to make sure as you're going through the MACRA program that you're focusing on quality as much as possible. Advancing care information, which is meaningful use, is 25%. So this is something that is a little less, but again, if you are already doing meaningful use, this is pretty easy. So you may as well go after it and try to get that 25% of your score. And then the last one are improvement activities, which is 15% of your score. This is a new area to everybody actually. But again, it's 15% of the score, and there are a few things in there that are not that difficult to obtain, which we'll discuss in our future upcoming sessions. The other thing that's important is how you're going to submit data. So once you've selected your measures and you're gathering all that stuff, you then have to figure out how you're going to submit it. And that's important because there are certain measures that aren't available. For instance, if you say, I'm going to submit via claims, then there may be certain measures that you cannot use. So this is an important thing to think about even before you're going through that measure selection process, how you plan on submitting, because it will potentially impact which measures you can select. And you can see from this table that each option is going to have a different, each component is going to have a different reporting mechanism. So for instance, quality is very similar to PQRS, so we can use claims, we can use registries, we can use our EHR. I'm going to skip cost because we don't have to worry about cost this year, but for advancing care and improvement activities, chances are that's going to be an attestation or something that comes from your EHR system. Very similar process for groups. This is an individual eligible clinician submission method, and this is a group. So it is very similar. The only difference with groups is if you have more than 25 physicians, you can use the CMS web interface. So that is slightly different if you're a group. I don't think we have a lot of folks actually doing that, but it is something that's available if you're a larger organization and want to take advantage of that. So places to start, I mean, there's a whole planning process that should be happening if you haven't done it already. You know, who's eligible? How do you guys want to participate? Do you want to just avoid penalty? Do you want to get some incentive? Do you want to go after a lot of incentive? Those are all the things that you need to focus on. The strategy around selecting your quality measures is something that should be put in a lot of thought into, involve the providers, make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then go after some of the low-hanging fruit as well, ACI, improvement activities. Those are all things that you can bump up for your score that'll be important. And then after all the key decisions have been made, there are things you're going to have to do to your EHR systems. You're going to have to adjust workflows, figure out how you're going to report on this stuff, monitor it, adjust workflows, you know, keep educating your providers. These are all things that you're going to have to do throughout the course of the implementation. So I'm going to hop over and show you guys a review of the document that I gave you for MACRA Planning. Before I do that, I just wanted to give you a heads up that we will have an upcoming webinar session on quality. That will be next Thursday at 12:30, same time. And that webinar will be specifically focused on just quality measures, how to calculate them, how to score them, all of that. So that will be our next session. So just to take a few moments, I want to just talk quickly about this document that should have been available in your webinar program when you load it up. This is a document that we've put together to help people with MIPS planning. And first, it's just an Excel document, so it's not, sounds fancier than it is actually, but the first document is just, the first tab of this is an overview of how the worksheet works, you know, each page and what it allows you to do. But if you go through the tabs at the bottom, you'll see these are the things that I just reviewed in the MACRA overview, the MIPS overview. The questions that you need to ask. Are you part of an APM? Yes or no? So these are, you know, these are things that as you're planning, you need to know so that you can build the best strategy for your organization. How are you going to, what are your goals? Do you just want to avoid penalties? Do you want to do 90 days, a full year? So each of these sections will have questions that you can answer to help build your strategy. And then the practice level, this allows you to just keep things organized. Put your practice information, your TIN, how many doctors you have. Again, there's things that will be important to you. Did you do PQRS last year? If so, you know, we might want to know what measures you selected and were they good? Did you perform well in them? Same thing with meaningful use and PCMH. And you can see there's the financial calculator here that will allow you to calculate those numbers. So you can see this is how much my organization had in Medicare Part B, and then for 2019, here's how much money I might have at stake. From there, it also goes to the clinician level. So you can do the same thing that we did at the practice level, just keeping all of your doctors and clinicians organized, their NPIs, what their roles are, their specialties. Again, you can put in their individual. So if people are going to report on an individual basis, you can tell each doctor how much money they have at risk. And this is these three fields here will help you calculate whether or not those providers would be excluded. So do they have a low beneficiary count? Are they newly enrolled? Do they see patients? These ones will allow you to figure out whether or not those providers actually have to do MIPS. So this workbook is there. I've given it to everybody that's attended this session. It's free for your use. You know, fill it out however you need. In upcoming sessions, we will be talking about the quality, the ACI, and the improvement activity tabs as well. Okay. So with that, we are at the end of this session. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them into the chat window, and you know, I can answer any questions that you might have available. I know we're a few minutes over, but feel free to ask anything. Otherwise, our next session will happen next Thursday, like I said. And in between now and then, if you have anything that you want to follow up with us on, you want to get any help on doing some of the planning and getting started sooner rather than later, feel free to reach out to us. Our email is info@h1tech.com, or you can also visit our website at www.h1tech.com. Okay. I am not seeing any questions in the chat window, so I will go ahead and end the event. Everybody have a great afternoon, and I will talk to you all next week. Thank you.